Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. This is Financial Stewardship and Accountability with Church360 Ledger. This is an overview webinar that will go through all of the core features of Church360 Ledger with that special focus on how it can help you in stewardship and accountability. My name is Peter Frank and I'm the Senior Manager at Concordia Technology Solutions. I've been with our organization for over 10 years now. More than half of that has been with Concordia Technology Solutions. I also work within our church supplies area, overseeing all of the products that assist in the management of the church, especially within financial areas such as electronic giving and offering envelopes, and software like Church360 Ledger, and also our church management software, Church360 Members. All of that helps paint a picture of stewardship for a congregation from the practical standpoint. I don't get into the theological side as much. I do have colleagues who do that, and we will have resources available for that. But today we're focused on Church360 Ledger. Before we get into that, a few housekeeping items. First off, there we go. I'll be presenting for about 50 minutes or so. We've got this scheduled for an hour. My plan is that the first 50 minutes will be presentation and the last 10 minutes will be for questions and answers. Now, I am notorious for going over those 50 minutes, so please ask questions throughout. That'll give me a good idea of how much time I need to spend, how much time I need to dedicate for questions at the end. If I see that there are no questions, I may just keep going, but I do ask that you ask them throughout, for one, to give me an idea how many are coming, but two, also to kind of get it off of your mind and into the queue. That way, if I happen to answer it throughout, you'll get your answer then, and I'll repeat the answer during the Q&A time, but it allows you to stay focused on the material being presented. Now, this webinar is being recorded. If you're one of those who are joining us after the fact, welcome. I thank you for being here. But if you are here live, welcome to you as well, because you get the value of having that live Q&A at the end. So thank you very much for being here. I'm excited to present our information today. Now, like I mentioned, I'm with Concordia Technology Solutions. We are the Church Administration Division of Concordia Publishing House, and we have been providing software solutions for churches for over 30 years, since the early 80s. So we have not always had web-based solutions like Church360 Ledger is, and we've also haven't always been called Concordia Technology Solutions. I think that's only been like the last 15 years or so. Well, today we're talking about Church360 Ledger. Now, Church360 Ledger is whoops, my PowerPoint's stalling out of me. There we go. It's part of the Church360 suite. And within that suite, there's also two other applications, Church360 Members and Church360 Unite. Now, each one of these can be used by themselves. They work just great. There are some added benefits by having them work together. So if you hear me mention Members or Unite, that's what that is. But please know that you don't have to have all three for Ledger to be valuable to you. In fact, Ledger is probably the most independent of the three, in that there's only a few integration points with the others, because church finances are such a unique thing that they have to be encapsulated in one. So it is, like I mentioned, it's an online church finance software. It was built a little bit differently than most finance softwares. First off, we built it to be intuitive, and I think every single software provider out there will say the same thing about theirs. And so what I mean by intuitive is that we wanted to lead you down a path of proper church finances without you having that knowledge. And so that's what we mean when we say intuitive, is that you don't have to know everything about finances in order to be able to use this. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. It's meant to be secure. We use all of the latest security that banks use to protect your data. With it being a general ledger software and not necessarily a financial management system, in that you don't have all of your bank account information, your passwords and everything like that. The data is meant to be tracking it, but it doesn't affect your finances, and so that by itself makes it more secure and less of a target. But we still want to make sure that it's secure, and so we use all of the best practices that we can. And lastly, it is church focused. There are many software packages out there that you can use for your church finances, but you'll find that many of them are meant for businesses. And we understand the distinction between a business and a church, and the things that a church has to do that are unique to them, the things that a church will never do, that other financial packages may build up for you, and it's just excess. So that's the distinction between Church360 Ledger and many of those other products that are out there. But I won't turn this into too much of a sales pitch. That's not my goal for today, so we'll just keep going. Our outline for today: first off, we're going to do an overview of what Church360 Ledger is, and we'll go through at a high level each of the different screens and what you can do in there. But we're really going to focus on some key stewardship principles, and we'll talk about that before we get into the software. That goes into how we built it and who we're trying to help here. But throughout this, you will get an entire tour of the software. You'll see all of the core aspects, all of the features to help give you a better understanding of how it works together. So at the very end, we'll have some question and answers, and like I mentioned before, please ask those throughout. That way I can see how many are in there, and you can get it off of your head and into the queue. So before we get too far in the presentation, I do have a few assumptions about you that I always make as we get into this. And so I'd like to confirm some of those assumptions, or at least help give me a better idea of who's here. We have a large group today. So first off, I'm assuming you're familiar with church finances, although not necessarily an expert. I do assume that you're new to Church360 Ledger. If you have been using Church360 Ledger for a while, you'll probably know most of this. This is not an advanced training by any means. It's an overview. And I also expect that you're extremely busy, and I've yet to meet a church worker, whether a paid staff person or a volunteer, who's not extremely busy. So that's why I keep this at an hour. I try to hold hard and fast to that 1 hour deadline because I know your time is valuable. But if you find that this is not valuable and you'd rather watch it in the recording afterwards, I completely understand. The ministry that you do in the church is far more important than the tools that you use for the ministry. And that's what Church360 Ledger is it's simply a tool to use to help you in the work of the gospel. So let me ask you a few questions as we go. I have a few poll questions that I'm going to ask. So I'm going to launch this first one, and we'll make sure that that gets up on your screen. Please select the option that most closely describes your primary role at the church. And so if you can take a look at that and mark which one. I know that in the church people wear many different hats, so if you have more than one, just select your primary. And it looks like, as I expected, most of the people here are in that financial role, although we do have at least one person in every single other role here, so that's great. Thank you very much. My next question is just to find out whether you've used Church360 Ledger or not. And so if you are you currently using Church360 Ledger in your congregation? Yes, no, or no, but planning to very soon. So that'll help me understand if I need to explain in more detail what it is. And yeah, it looks like we've only got a handful who are already using it. Most are not, so that's good. That helps me narrow the focus. I won't make any assumptions that you know where we're going. And I'm going to actually skip the last one because the last one was about what your skill level in Ledger is, and since we only have a couple people who are using it, that won't be a very interesting question. So let's go ahead and dig into our topic at hand. We're talking about stewardship and accountability. Let's go through why this is a challenge. So I put up here, let me make sure that gets up. There we go. Talking about church finances is difficult. And I know that's a blanket statement, but I find that to be true at my congregation where I serve on the Board of Elders, and I'm also on our church council. We talk about finances quite a bit, and it always makes people a little bit uncomfortable, but it's important, and everything requires some level of financial effort behind it. So what we try to talk about a lot is that the majority of our expenses are personnel expenses, but we need those people who are serving in that paid capacity to run the church and to share the gospel. So that's where it makes it difficult, especially when we talk about how we receive money. Within the church, pretty much every dollar has been donated. And that comes from Sunday offerings, and that may come from a variety of other contributions, endowments and such, but it's donated. The church doesn't have a product that we sell. Now, if you are in a situation where you're at a church and school, then you may have tuition that supports that as well. But for the most part, in the church itself, every dollar is donated. Well, with that, every donation comes directly from the heart, and so there's a personal aspect of that donation that is critical. It's giving back to the Lord what He has already given us, but that makes that so important that we have to take stewardship seriously, and so because of this, it makes stewardship critical. So what does stewardship actually look like? Not just in a congregation, certainly that's a big part of it, but what does it look like for us as we manage the finances in the church? Well, I've got three key things that I think are important. And I do apologize, my presentation is running slowly today. So the first thing that's important about stewardship is reliable record keeping. And you'll see I put a couple different words in each one of these things. Both of those are important. First off, we have to keep records, and it's disappointing to me how many churches I talk to that have not kept records in any kind of usable form. Now, there's not as much accountability there. Obviously, that's why it fell through, and we'll talk about that in a second. But not just record keeping, reliable record keeping, and preventing mistakes, doing it in the right way. That's a key part of stewardship, that we are properly managing the gifts that God has given us as best we can. So reliable record keeping is key. Transparency and communication. Like I said before, people don't like talking about church finances, but it's so critical that we do, and that we're transparent in our communication. That often, when we only share part of the story for fear of upsetting people or causing unnecessary stress, can often cause us to do more harm than good. And so that's something that we talk a lot about in my congregation, that I hear others talk about, that we just need to be transparent in that communication. And I'll show you how we can do that using Ledger as that tool. Lastly, there's got to be accountability in all areas, and that's the second part of our presentation today, and you'll see that throughout Church360 Ledger. But let's talk about what what accountability actually looks like. So in the church, there are two real ways that you keep people accountable. The first one, and that we try to implement within Church360 Ledger, is certainly preventing the ill-intentioned from doing wrong. Now, I think in the vast majority of the cases, congregations don't have people who are ill-intentioned when they're working with their finances. It does happen from time to time, and often you'll hear it on the news, and that's certainly a terrible thing. But that is few and far between. In most cases where there are problems on the financial side, it's from when the well-intentioned make mistakes. And so whatever we can do to prevent that from happening provides that extra accountability, which means we're being good stewards of our resources. So in the congregation, this is implemented in a number of different ways within the roles. So how do you do this in a congregation? Well, in my experience, I've seen several different types of roles. Often you will have somebody who is a volunteer who are ministry treasurers. So these are the people that you put in charge of maybe the youth group or the mission board, the evangelism committee, fellowship group. These are the people who manage the finances for that specific group, and they're generally volunteers because the entire ministry is a volunteer. And they tend to report in a way to the paid finance coordinator, the person who in the church office, either in a full-time or a part-time or sometimes very part-time basis, enter the transactions and monitor the finances to a certain level. Now, that person tends to report to an elected church treasurer, who's usually a volunteer. That role generally isn't paid, although it could be in some congregations. But that elected person is who the congregation says, we trust you with our finances. And so even though it's a paid finance coordinator, ultimately they report back to the treasurer. And the treasurer is not the be-all, end-all. The treasurer usually has an elected finance board that they oversee, but that also helps hold them accountable. And so it's these multiple layers of accountability that's key. Now, we in Church360 Ledger focus on accountability by really looking at two key kind of people. The first is that church treasurer. And so in our minds, in our kind of persona of this person, the church treasurer is an experienced accountant who oversees all aspects of church finances. They care about the details, and they really rely on an audit trail. They like to see those line items down to the nitty-gritty details, and any good church treasurer will look at those individual details because they care about them. They understand that it builds up into the entire picture. Now, on the other hand, we have our willing volunteer, the person who is, oops, sorry, things are going slowly on my screen. The willing volunteer is somebody who knows how to balance their own checkbook. They can enter transactions for the church, and they certainly care about the ministry. That's why they volunteered. Their primary goal is to not make a mistake, but they are by no means a financial expert. And so as we built Ledger, we look at it from these two people's perspective and say, how can we serve each of them? How can we provide the tool, the accountability that they both require in Church360 Ledger? And so that's what leads us into our demonstration of the product today. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch over to my screen. Part of the accountability and the security is our timeout. So I was signed in. I have to log back in again. And I forget exactly how long that timeout is. I've been idle for about 15 minutes. It's been, certainly it's less than that. So we'll go ahead and sign in. I know we've had some conversations about how long we should wait, and I think, yeah. Let me go here to the website real quickly. Church360ledger.com is where you begin. You can start your free trial there. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Anytime I run a webinar, I get this slow line. Oh, that's just fantastic. Let me go ahead. Now it's working. That had just been idle too long. All right, so this is the main screen of Church360 Ledger, and there's a lot of information right here. We don't have a dashboard view per se because we want to get you right to the data. But this is this main view is provides this quick, easy navigation throughout. So up at the top here where it says General, that is your book name. We'll talk about that pretty quickly, the different types of books you might have. So we'll leave that there and get into that. Below that, you have your omnibar, we call it, or your chart of accounts. When you clear in here, you can search and jump to any account throughout your entire chart quickly and easily, either by name. So if you want to type in, ministry and see all the different ministries that you have, you could type in, let's see, looks like we've got, well, yeah, like savings. The account number shows as the reference there, so you have that. If you put in the actual account number as part of your account name, you could quickly get to that. Otherwise, you'll have the reference there. Up in the top right here, you've got your print queue, which is for checks. You have your reports below that. We'll look at each one of those. Your settings, which we'll spend quite a bit of time on, and then also your user profile. And so you can do your user settings there. You can confirm your password, or you can update your password there. Gives you that double layer of security. So you'll get the same view if you need to reset your password. All right, but let's start out over here. We'll get into the rest of the view and the charts of account, the date selector, all of that as we get into transactions. But here up in your settings, we're going to jump to start right down here to general settings. We put the lesser used ones at the bottom. This is where you can set your church information, your address, your phone number, what type of checks you use, if you're using 2 signature checks and all of that. You can put that right here, and that flows into all of your different reports. we're going to jump over here to books. There's different names for this depending on your congregation and how you like to use it. Some people call it funds. I think that's the phrase we use in Shepherd Staff, our PC-based church management software. But we call it books here, and these are really sets of charts of accounts. So in a congregation, you may have multiple books. So if you have a church and school and you keep their finances and their budgets separate, you can have different books for each one of those just within your one account. At my congregation, our church and school are on one chart of accounts, but then there are other groups like the men's club that run their books separately. And that's where you can use this. And so it's meant to provide that flexibility to have multiple sets of books in here, and it's really easy to add a new one. So you would just enter in here. So if we want to do school, and you can have a different fiscal year. I think in most congregations that have multiple books, they run them at the same time, but maybe you don't. And so then you can set the starting month and then starting date, beginning of book activity, just in case you you're running a fiscal year at one point, but you're starting out in Church360 Ledger at a different point, and you can go ahead and submit that. And you can toggle between your books up here just by clicking on that and switching. So we're going to stick with the general book right now. All right. I clicked on it, it took me back to the home page. The next thing that I want to look at is your chart of accounts, and that's a key part of what makes a book unique, is that each book has their own chart of accounts. Now, I have the screen zoomed in so that you can see it, so there will be more scrolling. Typically, when I use it like this so I can see more at a single time. But for purposes of demonstration, I do have this zoomed in. And you've got your four main types of accounts: assets, liabilities, income, and expense. And to view which ones are in each, you just click on it, and it does this kind of accordion style hide and reveal. So we're at assets right now. Now you'll notice that some of the lines are indented, and the ones above that will have a dark line across the top, or the left-hand side. These are categories, and the ones without the lines are the funds. And so if we go in here, so here's central trust is our category, checking is our category, and then we have central trust checking, which is our account. We do this probably more than we need to, having these different categories, just because of demonstration purposes. But so let's say we wanted to add a new account that was a CD. So we'll call it bank CD. An account number is optional. You don't have to include this. It is, if you have a set structure of chart of account numbers that you want to apply, you can do that here. You can put whatever characters you need in there, but it's not required, because in some situations it's easier to just have the name than all the account information. So if you are somebody who's new to finances and you don't want to set up an account structure, you don't have to. But if you are that experienced treasurer who's used to this set number of accounts, and the numbers within the account number tell you something about the account, you can do that as well. Now the initial balance, we'll start at 0 here. You can set this once at the beginning when you're starting, but you can't change this later on without a journal entry. And that's one of the easiest ways for fraud to happen in the church. And so we prevent that from happening. Once you start entering transactions, you can't change that. And then you can also mark whether you can write checks from this account. That only occurs for assets. So there is our account. We'll move that up into here, savings under central trust, and we just drag and drop it, put it under those categories, and we'll save. And it'll tell me what changes I'm saving. So I'll go ahead and confirm that. So, and you can do that easily throughout your different types. So, of course, assets are the accounts that have real money in them. The liabilities are the accounts that require money, that is owed. And so you'll see here things like payroll tax deductions are included in here, or just other kinds of deductions. Income is the money that's coming in, offerings and maybe interest, fundraising, all of that kind of, those those monies that come in as donations or in exchange for goods or service if you're doing some kind of fundraiser or something like that. And then lastly, you have your expenses. And this is what I typically see is broken down into the most amount of detail here. And you have all of your different types of expenses, and you can do as many different categories as you need. Certainly the farther down the tree you get, the more complicated it becomes for you to manage, but you can do that. All right. One of the key things from a stewardship perspective, we talked about that before as we were talking about our, whoops, I'm jumping too far over, pardon me, I clicked on the wrong thing. There, as we talk about reliable record keeping, when you receive money for a specific cause, it's required that you keep that set aside for that cause. So let me give you an example. If you receive a donation that is for your mission trip, you need to make sure that the money is set aside for that mission trip. And you could deposit into your checking account and just know that you have, let's say, $100 set aside for missions. It's best to track that somewhere, even though the money is within your checking account. And that's why we have a way of doing that called restricted funds. And each asset account has this button for add a new restricted fund. Now, you won't see that in any other account type, even under liabilities, even though that's real money, because it's money that's set aside for specific purposes. So when I go and click New Restricted Fund, it becomes a subset of the Central Trust Checking. And I'm going to put this as the Mission Trip Fund. And I'm going to call that Restricted Fund so that I know. There you go, Mission Trip Restricted Fund. And we'll submit that. Now, as soon as I submit that, you'll notice that I also have an unrestricted Central Trust Checking Fund. Now, these both add up. Right now, the mission trip is 0. These both add up into that Central Trust Checking. And when we go to reconcile it later, when we match it with the bank statement, it will just be that Central Trust Checking. The bank will not know anything about how we have this total amount divided into restricted funds, but we will, and that's what we're doing as we manage our finances. So let me go ahead and add another one in here. We'll add Vacation Bible School, and I'm just going to name it Restricted Fund for demonstration purposes. Now when I go to submit that, I don't get another unrestricted one because we already have one. It's just already created for this account. And you can do this for any of your asset accounts. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. 3 new accounts created, the 2 restricted funds and the unrestricted. So I'll go ahead and confirm that. So anytime I confirm that, I get the message up at the top. Chart of accounts was updated. That is helpful to know. All right, so we'll come back to that as we begin to look at transactions. But before we do that, I want to look at budgets, because budgets are a key thing for accountability. All right, so underneath the settings, below chart of accounts, there are budgets. And when I click on budget, that screen has a lot that's going on in that, and so it takes a second to load. So if you see it and it shows up blank, don't worry too much. It's pulling all sorts of information. There we go. And what this is doing is it's showing from the fiscal year that we're looking at all of the totals for income and expense. You only budget income and expense in the church, what's coming in and what's going out. Now, the way you can pick your year is over here on the far right. You have your date selector, and in the budgets view, the date selector looks a little bit different than you'll see in the accounts view, and we'll look at that in a bit. But you can see all of your individual fiscal years, and it's got the name of the fiscal year and the dates for reference. In this case, it's just a calendar year. If I go to budget for 2018, it'll take a second because it's going to update all of my numbers. I've got a pretty large chart of accounts here. So it goes and puts all these numbers at 0 because I haven't done anything with it yet. Now, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. You can see that as I zoom out, I still get that full view. We try to pack as much information on here in one view. Unfortunately, when I zoom in too much, then I don't get all of the columns in there. But at 100%, you'll see all of the columns in place, depending on your screen size, I should say. If you have a really small resolution, it won't. But the gray lines are the totals, or the gray rows. The white rows are the ones that you can budget. And so if you want, there you have the, I click on the total for general fund. If you want to divide that up by month, evenly spread, so there's 12,000, you can see there 1,000 for each month automatically populates. Now if, like mission fund, if I know that the big fundraising is happening in May, I can just go straight to that month and add it in, and it automatically totals as I go. Now the other great part is as you're on a line, you can see the previous year's budget and the previous year's actual. And if you want to select one of those, you just click previous year budget and put it in place. Now it gives you that total, and from there, let's say you want to round it. So 2196 was previous year budget. I'm just going to do 2200. There we go. That should update my totals for that. There we go. Or I can go previous year actuals, and it'll change that out. And then I can go fill in the gaps. Depending on what time of year you're doing this, you may not have it. And this database that I'm using looks like the last transactions we entered were in April. Okay, so that is how you do budgets. Now there's a few other things that you can do to make it easier, and we'll provide training for that. We usually do that a couple times a year. But you can export it to Excel and distribute it that way if you only want to distribute a few rows to people. You can also paste in here. So if you're using that Excel spreadsheet, you can paste back from Excel, and you can do it all at once. You can also do it row by row. So if you've got a row with 12 months in there, you can copy in Excel, go into the first one and paste it in. So there's a number of quick tricks that help you with that. The other thing I forgot to mention, up here in the top left, there's a change all to last year's budget. If you want to start with last year's budget and then change it from there. Now be careful, any work that you've put in here will be overridden when you do that. So after all that, you click Save Changes, and it will take a second and let you know your budgets have been updated. So I could go into that in more detail. That's not the primary goal, but we've tried to make budgeting real easy. And this is our second or third iteration of this after receiving more and more feedback. So one thing I forgot to mention, we talked about fiscal years here. If you need to change your fiscal year, you can do that underneath the settings. And this is also where you can see what has been locked, and you can close different years. So this one, we haven't locked it yet. There's 2012. We'll lock that. And now 2013 can be locked. And so you can only unlock as you go backwards. And so I can't go and unlock 2012 if I've already closed off 2013. And so we can go in year after year at the close of each year after we've reconciled everything and mark that. And so like I can't lock 2017 because 2017 hasn't ended yet. I could unlock 2016 if I wanted to, but I can't go any farther back. You can also start a new fiscal year at a different time. So let's say you're going from a calendar year to a school year kind of thing. You could start a new calendar year in July, and then you'd have a short calendar year in between. So it doesn't let you have a short fiscal year. It doesn't let you have like an 18-month fiscal year, but you could have a 6-month fiscal year. So that's getting into the nitty-gritty and edge cases. I just want to show that it has that flexibility. Now let's talk about transactions a little bit. So we're going to go back to the general view, and we don't have to do that. You'll notice that as we go through the navigation, there's a few things that are always present. These top 2 lines are always going to be there. So from any view, you can go and search for a chart of accounts, or you can go and enter in a new transaction, which is what we'll be looking at in a minute. But in this account view, you can see here at the home, you have your 4 key types of accounts. assets, liabilities, income, and expense. And then when you click on one of these, like assets, you can go and drill deeper. And so there's assets, central trust, checking, central trust checking. And now here we are in our central trust checking, that actual bank account, and then you'll see our restricted funds are here. Unrestricted is the entire amount, and then the restricted, which we haven't added anything to yet. Now below this you have your graph, which will allow you to see what the running balance is at a point in time, and it's for everything below the tree. You've got these breadcrumbs up here that help you go. And so you can choose to expand or contract that, give you a little bit more space if you don't want to see the visual navigation there. We'll talk about reconcile in just a few minutes. Over on the far right, and this is consistent in almost every view, you'll have an export to an Excel, a print button, and a date selector. And this date selector gives you a range for the data that is being displayed. So right now it's in a full calendar year, 2017. You could do it by quarter. If we go to quarter 4 for 2017, there's nothing there yet. If we did it for 2016, and then quarter 4, you'll get down to that level. Now, if we go, we're going to do quarter 1, 2017. You also have the months as an option, or you can do your own custom date range. So you've got all of this different ability to get down to just the date range you want with these quick selections for the most common date ranges. But you don't have to do any of that to enter a transaction. The transactions can be done from any view in any type of transaction. I tend to go to the account so I can see the balance and make sure everything seems right before I enter anything in. So when we click New Transaction, you'll see there's Transfer, Deposit, Payment, Check, and Journal Entry. Let's do that first one, Transfer. This will pop open your transaction view, and it's an overlay on the screen, and you've got this X on the top right. When you click X, it'll take you right back to the screen that you were in. But these different transaction types will give you a predefined path that adjusts as you go to make sure you're doing everything right. Let me explain what I mean. In the transfer view, you've got a place for a memo and a date. You can pick, let's say, we'll do today because we created those restricted funds today. Then your first thing over here says pick an asset, expense, income, or liability account. When we click here, we're going to go to unrestricted central checking. That's an asset account. Now on the far right, my balance side of things also gives me an asset. That's because a transfer can only go from one account type to another. So if we're transferring from one asset to the other, I say, okay, I'm going to transfer $500 from unrestricted central trust, and I'm going to put that in my mission trip fund. And it automatically puts the $500. If I wanted to split that between mission and VBS, I'll do that, and I'll put 250 here, oops, and 250 here. Now you'll notice that I've got the 250 remaining. So just tells me how many I have left to have a balanced transaction. So there we go. That would transfer money from unrestricted to restriction. Now that transfer is a transfer on the chart of accounts, not a transfer between a banking account to another banking account. But that's okay. That's what we're tracking is our chart of accounts, not our bank accounts here. So you'll see down below that the unrestricted is being credited 500, and it's being debited on the restricted funds. I'm sorry, the restricted funds are being debited 250 each. Now, if you don't know what credits and debits are, that's okay. 360 Ledger does. It does that for you. If you're like me and you have to look at your cheat sheet on the bulletin board to say, okay, if I want to increase or decrease, I should say in this case, decrease an asset, I have to credit it. Increase an asset, I have to debit it. I have this little chart up there that helps me with that because I don't have it memorized because I'm not a church financial person. I'm a lay person who is trying to do church finances, and so that's what makes it easy for me. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now that is put in place. Now you'll see it doesn't show up in here because I don't have the dates selected. So let me go and do all of 2017, and there is my transfer. Okay, let's go back to transactions. And when I go to transfer again, you can see I have a drop down here with those different types. So each one is a little bit different. Deposit, payment, check, and then journal entry. So we'll do a couple more of these. First off, a deposit. So let's say offerings came in from the church. We'll put memo as offerings from October 22nd, 2017. Transaction date is 10/23. There is no payee in this case, although that is optional in case you're doing some kind of debit or like a refund or something along those lines. All right, we'll put our asset in here, and we'll say it's going into unrestricted checking. We had $1,000, and the income comes from the money comes from income accounts. So general fund had 800, and mission fund had 125, and then let's go to Vacation Bible School had 75. Now, this, again, gives you the credits and debits. This is your T chart, if you're familiar with that term, and it puts everything exactly how it's supposed to be. Now, I'll go ahead and hit Save, and my transaction is done. Now, it shows up down here. Now, let's say that I made a mistake, and let's say that the offerings was supposed to be, click on that, let's say the offerings was supposed to be $50 Vacation Bible School and $150 Mission Fund. When I click on that, I'm editing the transaction, and I'll change it to 50, and I'll change it to 150, and that makes it balanced again. And I'll say here, for amendment memo, typo on restricted funds. And I'll save that. All right. The balance of the transaction hasn't changed, although I could do it at that time as well. And chances are, if you are a financial person and you see that, you'll say, we should not be editing transactions. Well, that is correct. We should not be editing transactions, which in this case we actually didn't. So when I refresh it, I should get the little caret there that tells me it's changed, maybe because of maybe because I didn't change the total on here. Let me go into mission. Oops. Sorry about that. I'm losing my place here. Yeah, it did have that. There's the amendment. There's normally a little caret. I'm wondering if it's just because of how I have it zoomed, or my dates that tell me that it's been edited. I think it's only when I change the total amount of that. I'll test that later on. Sorry for you watching me try to figure it out as I go. The important part is, though, is that you are not actually changing the transaction or editing the transaction. You're actually creating a journal entry that goes with it. And so as we go in here up under reports to the event log, and this will take a second because there's a lot of information that shows. All of this is tracked so that it provides that additional level of accountability, so that as changes are being made to your chart of accounts, as changes are being made to transactions, it's easy enough to do that you edit it. But all of that is tracked so that you're not doing this when you shouldn't be. So if that makes sense, that allows you to see everything that has been changed in your transactions without it actually being hidden as an edit. So here we go. You can see here 1023 created a new transaction 663299, which is an internal number, a revision of this transaction. So when I click on this new transaction, you see this is my journal entry that just shows a credit of 25 and a debit of 25, switching those funds from the right restricted fund to the other one. So we haven't actually edited anything. We've done an addition and kind of combined them, summarized that transaction. So that's the important part here that I want to show that's a little bit unique, because it accomplishes both things that we are trying to accomplish. For the untrained volunteer finance person, you can just edit a transaction like you would expect. And for the experienced financial person, you are getting that journal entry, because one of the types of transactions you can do, journal entry, is very straightforward. It's what you would expect on a journal entry. You pick your accounts and you then do the T-chart accounting. And so you would credit 125, oops, and I should actually select different ones. There's Vacation Bible School. So you'd credit one and debit the other and save that. That would make your official change. And this is how you can do other types of transactions like interest. You might do that in that way. But you don't have to, because if you don't know it, this can be a little confusing. And so that's why we've set up the edited transactions in that way. All right, there's a few things that I do want to show. I'm talking quite a bit. I do apologize. I always tend to go over. I don't have too many questions in the queue yet, so if you do have questions, please let me know. I am going to show you a couple other things before I go too far. So let's go back to that Central Trust checking account. You probably saw this before, a reconcile button. We make that green up in the top. When you click reconcile, it'll take you into your month-end reconciliation mode. And I should note that this is only for asset accounts that maintain a total balance. So you see the unrestricted, restricted funds and restricted funds are below that. This is that main account that carries a balance at the bank. So when we click reconcile, it takes you into a brand new mode where you can take your bank statement, look at the starting and ending balances and plug those in here, and then begin checking off transactions as you see them on your account. And it'll tell you if the difference is there and let you know what hasn't been reconciled yet. And from there you can't edit those transactions. So that's reconciliation mode. I could certainly get into far more details with that. But what I want to show you next is related to that transparent report and transparent communication. Under settings, under roles, you can have different type of roles that users can have. And so right now I'm in here as an administrator, which means I can do everything. If I add a new role, and I may call this, let's call it Mission Trip Leader. You can say it applies only to the general book. Can't manage the chart of accounts, can't view all accounts. I can only view some accounts. We'll just click that Can View right now, and we're not going to do any kind of transaction. So we'll click Submit, and then when we go in here, you can select the accounts. You have to get that general fund in there first. So if we say you can only view certain accounts, we can go into the Mission Trip asset and the Mission Trip offerings, and I don't know if we have an expense account for mission trips. That would make the most sense. Here we go, missions. And is there a save button? I think it saves automatically for you, yeah. So we'll just X out of that. And you can view 4 selected accounts. So I'm going to submit that. And it says you can see a subset of accounts. From there, what I can do is I can go up to Settings and Users and add a new user, and we'll just do test@test.com, and then I select which roles they have. And you can have multiple roles. So as we talked before, people wear many hats in the congregation. You can set up different types of roles that are read-only for certain accounts, and maybe you allow some people to enter transactions but not manage your accounts. But you can get really fine-grained in terms of who can do what within Church360 Ledger. And that allows for a number of things. Proper stewardship by knowing how much money is available in your assets, seeing where you're at compared to budget. We haven't even looked at budget yet. I'll make sure to show that. But it also allows you to be transparent in your communication to say everybody can see where they're at, where they can see what they need to see, so that we all know what our financial situation is. And that's really that key part of it, is if we all know the reality of the situation, you've got that mutual accountability, but you also don't have misplaced expectations on what we should or should not be able to do. So let me go back here to general. We're not actually going to invite test. And we can go into income. And you can see here, income and expense both have this budget line. And so as you go all the way down, we'll go to offerings and funds and general fund. You can start to see where your offerings are for the general fund compared to what you expected them to be. And you can see under budget by $23,000 as of March 26th. This also provides that accountability, so you can say, all right, our income is down, our expenses may be up. We'll have to watch that carefully. Now, a better way of doing this would be through your different reports. Here we go. We'll go to the income and expense report. And this shows income and expense compared to budget for a given time period. So this is where your date selector comes into play. We'll do Q1 2017. There's our budget. There's our actual, percent of budget, and dollars remaining. And so you'll see we've got this little arrow here. We can collapse these and just do a summary report and say, okay, our budget was that we'd have $67,000, $68,000 income, basically $60,000 expense, a surplus of $8,000. Here's where we actually are with a surplus of $12,000. Now it's important to understand the remaining is just the difference between budget and actual. And so that's why we have a negative total, because we actually are above. It's budget minus actual. It turns into a negative. That's a good thing when you're looking at income less expense, where you are compared to budget. Another kind of common financial report is just your general chart of accounts report, which shows your beginning and ending balances for a given time period. And this shows you all of your charts of accounts. And starting balance of assets is really probably the most important one. This will show you your cash flow during that time frame. Debits and credits and your change. You've gained $12,000 during that time frame. We also have a balance sheet which shows your assets less liabilities. And it's very much like the chart of accounts, except it gives you this total at the bottom. We don't have any liabilities right now. So those are some of your key reports. We also have the general ledger report that gives you something very similar to the account view, but puts all of your accounts in one place and allows you to group by payee, group by account, filter by type, payee account. If you want your check log here, you could do that. Just all checks for your central checking account, something like that. You could do that in that way. So you have all of your different types of accounts that have transactions related to checks. Each one will filter it even further. So very powerful reports. You can export them, you can print them, you can do what you need to do from here. But I do think it's important to note that these individual views are also reports for you. If you wanted to get into your mission trip restricted fund report, you just jump there. And we'll go for the entire year as opposed to just the quarter, so you can see that down there. Okay, I'm running short of time. There's a few other things that I meant to show, like check printing. I didn't quite get there yet, but I wanted to focus on some of those key things. Before I get into question and answers, let me just show you a couple things. If you haven't started your free 37-day trial, you can do that at 360ledger.com. You may say, why is it 37 days? Well, we give you a whole month plus a week so that you can reconcile those transactions. That's what we try to do. Typical month is 30 days, give you that extra 7 days to reconcile. So you can essentially span 2 months, so you can get past month end. If you have questions or would like to get started, I'll put my contact information up there on the screen. You can talk with me or one of our software consultants. I'll leave that up there while I take a look at the questions. That's where we're going to go next. Larry had the question, since this is web-based, does the platform I'm using matter? No, Larry, it doesn't. You can use this on a PC or a Mac. You can use this on any kind of tablet. Many of the views work well on mobile devices, although it was not designed specifically to be done on your phone. In most cases, we have found church finances are done at a desktop, but we make that laptop or a tablet view easy as well so that it all condenses nicely. There are some things you can do on mobile. You won't have like your reporting available there. And then you also asked, Larry, does this track donations to pledges? No, it does not, because the pledges are usually done at the giver level, and Church360 members does that. And so we put that in there so that individuals who pledge can track their progress. All of the contributions, the things that revolve around the membership, your members of your congregation, are in Church360 members. Now those transactions, those offerings do flow into Ledger and allow you to match offerings funds in both, so it makes for real quick deposits for you. So, and Thomas had the question on the reports, can you add an annual column to each section? It seems Romania is also slated to the segment of the time. This comes in handy because many church expenses are not monthly. And you're right. Let me show you what you would do with that. So if we go back here to the income and expense view, you would just make this be, by selecting your date range of annual, that would actually be your annual totals. And so you can see for the year, if your income for 2017 is budgeted to be 271 and you're at 97 right now, you can see percent of overall budget and remaining. And I should note that these years are set up to be fiscal years. So if you have a non-calendar fiscal year, it will show up accordingly for you. Of course, at any time you can select your own dates, but it's meant to be based on your fiscal year. So that's how you would do that. The next question is, how does this integrate with my church management system? We use Shepherd Staff. Lynn asked that question. Lynn, we have the Shepherd Staff Finance module that we will import into Church360 Ledger for you. Now there is a little caveat with that. If you're using dedicated accounts in Shepherd Staff, which do transactions in a very different way, that's kind of your fifth type of account in Shepherd Staff, in addition to assets, liabilities, income, and expense. If you use that in that way, we can't import all of your transactions because there's no good way to transfer that in. We can bring over your chart of accounts and your balances and your pays and all that still. That'll still come across. It just won't be all your individual transactions. Now, if you are using are not using dedicated accounts, then we can bring over all your transactions, and it's a smooth, easy, and free data conversion for you. But Shepherd Staff is the only data that we convert for finances. So Larry had the question, we do direct deposit for payroll and don't write checks. Will this handle these types as well? Thank you for bringing that up. I didn't get to show checks. You're asking about regular payments. There is a transaction type called payments, and of course every transaction is just a journal entry. But you could do a payroll check and have it coming from your checking account, and then put in all of your different tax deductions here, and we'll just put all of that through. And I won't do all of the totals, but let's just say you were putting that in and you were withholding money for finances or for taxes. As you go through this, you can build that transaction and you can save that. We'll just balance that out. You can make that a recurring check that happens, you know, every other week on Friday. So you can build out this entire transaction, put in your totals, and save that. This is kind of a goofy one because we didn't actually have an expense account. That's okay. I'm just showing the types of how you can have recurring transactions. And so that becomes a payroll check every other Friday. Now this will allow you to, it'll show up here in a new view for imported transactions or pending transactions, I think is what we call it. And then every other Friday, that'll show up and you can make any tweaks that you need, but it's kind of like a templated transaction for you. So that's one way you can do that. Now if you use Paychex, Paychex is the preferred payroll provider of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod using Concordia Plan Services. We work directly with them where they will provide a paycheck or a payroll file, a text document that you can import in, and that'll create all the transactions for you. And so certainly with direct deposits, you can do that. Most churches that we work with are not writing physical checks for payroll anymore, although they may still do that for other types of payments. And while I've got, well, I don't really have a minute, but I will show that I don't have any more questions. I will show you how we can do a check real quick. The check view is similar to the payment type, but you would put in a payee, like let's say AT&T. You can enter in your check number. You can wait till you print it, and you put in that amount, and you put in your expense. And so we'll call it telephone, and we'll call this phone bill for October, or you could put your account number on there, depending on what you need. And it'll give you an example of what the check will look like. When you go to save that check, that will show up in your check queue, and this is where you can go to print it. And you can print multiple at once. You can also just mark as printed if you're doing electronic checks. But when you go to print it, then it gives you this view, and so you can see exactly how it will print and enter in the number and everything there too. So that was something I skipped over before. I do apologize for that. But it creates the same kind of transactions of payment. It just gives you this added functionality of printing a check. All right, the last question of today before I sign off here is, can you sync this with bank accounts? Or are all deposits expenses manually entered? At this point, we do not sync with bank accounts. They do have to be manually entered, and that's because with the bank account you're only seeing one side of that transaction, and then you have to do the other side. And so we don't have that sync in place. We're considering it for future, although there's a lot of variables that come into play, and we want to make sure that it would be good. So we're still considering that. Right now it's all manual entry, and we try to make that process as easy as possible for you. All right, so I'm going to go back to my contact information. That does conclude our presentation today. And even though I had to rush through it at the end, I apologize that I went too long in my presentation. I did get all the questions answered. But if you have something else that comes up after the fact, please go ahead and send me an email or give me a call, or you can talk with one of our software consultants at the contact information listed there. I hope you found this information valuable. As you can see, there's a lot that Church360 Ledger can do. I know that the theme for today of stewardship and accountability was throughout the presentation. I hope you can see that as well, that that's something we take very seriously and have implemented that throughout all of Church360 Ledger. So thank you again for attending, and with that, I'm going to sign off. Everybody have a great day. Bye.